Well, folks, it's time. The one we have all been waiting for. Every single Formula One front wing has got a stiffy. But will that be enough to see Ferrari come first? As the media is busy coming up with their own fixes for the Monaco Grand Prix, which will probably never happen because traditions, because you see the same old thing time and time again. The motoring club of Monaco is not going to bat an eyelid, they'll cite it's too expensive. Then you get all of the things about Formula E going, yeah, see, we can overtake loads! And all in the midst of us heading to most likely the last ever Spanish Grand Prix at the Circuit de Catalunya, because we're headed to Madrid next year. But for now, we're all going into the second act of the season with the looming technical directive in the back of our minds. TD18. That's the thing that's been hanging over our heads since before the season began. We got a little bit of a snifter at the Chinese Grand Prix with the rear wing being taken a look at, but now the front wing's getting that subjected as well, going from 15mm of flex to 10mm. But what it is essentially is that the FIA is trying to stop the wings just wobbling about too much. That means it can in theory stall the front wing, which means that it reduces drag and therefore it increases top speed down the straights and what have you. And this concept is nothing new. I've seen talk of flexible front wings going back to the 90s, but even then it was basically in its infancy, and every single time the FIA would then impose new rules, the teams would find some workaround, and it's just been a steady decrease in flexibility ever since the concept was discovered. I bet you the world beat directors, we're going to be seeing so many front wing angles and cameras, and that would actually go some way to explain why we have those dots on the rear wing. They're reference markers for the stewards, so the more you know. Maybe we might see some of those on the front wings, perhaps. Yeah, of course, it will make predicting things harder, since nobody's quite sure how the pack will shuffle around, or maybe not shuffle around. It's entirely possible that some teams may have already introduced stiffer front wings, getting ahead of the curve. But naturally, I will continue to be wrong in my forecast, so do keep watching to find out my top 5. However, as we approach the end of the second triple header of this season, and we're only at round 9, there is some very important news to chew over, other than people complaining about the Monaco Grand Prix and coming up with their own ideas. Max Verstappen to Aston Martin next year? Nah, that's dead in the water now. So say the head honcho, the real head honcho of Aston Martin, Adrian Newey. Because yes, Papa Straw may own it, doesn't necessarily mean he runs it. Fresh from his public outing in Aston Martin attire around Monte Carlo, Newey was honest when asked if the team could potentially tempt the Dutchman over to their team quite quickly, ahead of his Red Bull deal expiring. It was admittedly a long-term prospect, that right now Aston Martin are in absolutely no condition to provide Max Verstappen a fast car, aside from the AMR25 that we see, because we know that that's not fast. It's all to do with the stuff behind the scenes, as Newey describes, right here, in full consideration. In this particular case, that's choosing a team that he believes will deliver the fastest car. So if we're ever to attract Max, the first thing we have to do is make a fast car. Duh. You can have the best motion system in the world, but if you don't have the modelling to go with it, and correlation with the aero model, correlation with the tyre model and so on, it won't be of any use. But the factory is probably the best factory in Formula 1, and the wind tunnel is arguably the best in Formula 1, which in turn will not attract the likes of Max Verstappen, even if Honda is begging and pleading Aston Martin to take him. If they can't put things together, nah, it's all mud. And according to the designer, it's not a quick fix either. He's predicting that it's going to be taking around 2 years to fully get on top of this problem and have a good enough simulator to pass through the data. And by that time, all of the swanky new tech that Aston Martin paid for would not be cutting edge, because there'll be other teams, probably Audi and Williams and what have you, who will come up with even newer tech. And it's things that I think Fernando Alonso might not be around to see the full fruits of. And I've also seen a couple of pieces where Newey has defended Lance Stroll and says that people should give him more credit, and whilst I do believe in giving credit where it's due, it's not a good omen for the two-time world champion. But in any case, after just 3 months in charge of this department, Newey seemingly has sussed out what the team needs to do and update to effectively run its team. Put simply, the team can no longer blame themselves for not having the adequate tools, because, well, they do. Hardware excellence is the watchword there. And it's actually something he's not fully experienced since he was back at McLaren when the McLaren Technology Centre first opened in 2004. Because we all know the story of Red Bull having a Cold War era wind tunnel, and then Adrian Newey talking about uninspiring industrial estates around Milton Keynes, but Red Bull managed to make it work. So can you imagine the potential of Adrian when he's got big swanky toys that he can play with? It's going to be absolutely marvellous. But yeah, for anyone trying to pen an article about Max Verstappen going to Aston in 2026, yeah, just put your pens down or your keyboards away. I think 2027 at the earliest will be where he goes, if at all. Maybe he might just see out the Red Bull contract and then go to Aston Martin. It really depends where Red Bull actually goes and who's actually in charge of that, because then I've seen rumours of Christian Horner being pegged by Ferrari for next year. What? Yeah, don't look at me. Daily Express. I mean, I just saw it, but I'm not going to touch that any further. You can look it up yourselves. But needless to say, Aston Martin, give it a year or so, they may be in a good position to at least try, just not right now. And trying seems to be the word to sum up the current state of affairs regarding the working relationship between Lewis Hamilton and his race engineer, Riccardo Adami. It hitting seemingly a new low during the Monaco Grand Prix weekend. Now, of course, there will be many out there who will be thinking that I'm hating on Lewis Hamilton for the sake of it, and that it's going to take time for this working relationship to come together, because look at what happened with Bono. And Lewis did admit that he probably said, oh, won't you take a tea break while you're at it? He probably said that at least once to Bono in their 12 years working together. That's fairly understandable. But you got to admit, though, around the Monaco Grand Prix, probably the most stress-inducing race on the entire calendar, you need to have something that is absolutely tight, absolutely bulletproof to work properly, especially when you do have radio issues and communication difficulties around the tunnel sector 2 area. And when you compare and contrast to what we saw with Esteban Ocon and Laura Müller, those two absolutely elated with getting into Q3 and then ultimately P7, Adami and Hamilton, completely different. The absolute opposite. Ocon and Müller thrived. I think Adami and Hamilton died out there. Because as a result of these communication issues and difficulties and friction, it's meant that Hamilton's not had the smooth transition into Ferrari that Alonso, Vettel, and even Prost had at the beginning, because they all won within a few races. Hamilton, he's not even come close to winning a Grand Prix. And that could easily be down to not just the car being difficult, but also him not having the right person to give him the right information that he needs to actually go about his duties. Because then you got that message after the race during the cooldown lap where Lewis timidly asked, have I upset you or something? And that felt genuinely like, oh dang, is he okay? Like, I felt that. I really did. And then nothing. And then, of course, Fred Vasseur, typical Fred Vasseur at the moment, very much came out on the defensive saying, there is absolutely nothing wrong with Riccardo, and Lewis is absolutely fine. We talked about it after the race, so you are quite frankly talking a lot about Bull merde. Oh yeah, by the way, I just found out that there's been some updates regarding official partners, and Gatorade might be sponsoring sprint races. So the Gatorade something something sprint, and then Doritos, and PepsiCo, and and then pictures of Daniel Ricciardo's face. So, yeah, this is not fueling the whole thing about Ricciardo making a comeback or something like that. Okay. Anyway, back to Ferrari. Naturally, Fred Vasseur came out on the defensive and produced multiple excuses for this frosty situation, citing that Adami may not have been on comms at the time of the cooldown lap, so therefore Hamilton, his voice wasn't heard. Then in another interview, Vasseur clarified the matter that Ferrari has its very own tight procedure of communication around the track. For example, if a driver asks a question around Sector 1, turns 1 through 3, they won't get a response from their engineer until they've cleared the tunnel when they're back in radio communications clearly, and also after the tight twisty area around Mirabeau, Portier, Fairmont, what have you. And yeah, it is kind of fair and considerate because you've got to really be focused around that section of the track, especially when the cars have a completely specific steering rack for this track. No other circuit has that particular part because the tights are so twisty bendy. But yeah, I'm just not buying this, Fred. After 8 races at this point, and around one of the most stressful ones, it's clear that something is off with this relationship, that something has to be done. That maybe the pressure of working with 7-time world champion Lewis Hamilton is starting to be too much, even though Adami worked with the likes of Sebastian Vettel, Carlos Sainz as well, who was also quite cerebral, as was Vettel. Maybe there's just something different here, I don't know. And it's really starting to affect the results that Lewis can provide, because you've only got to look at what happened with the 3-place grid drop in qualifying, because that was down to a miscommunication from Adami, saying that Max was not on a push lap, then he was, and then he wasn't again. Then it turns out he definitely was, that there was a delay, and that cost Lewis dearly. Because can you imagine that if Lewis had actually started on the second row, he might have actually had some play to part in giving Piastri some trouble. He might have been right up there with the leading pack, and then Verstappen may not have had a leg to stand on. He was 48 seconds down ultimately. Or was it a minute? He didn't know, because he didn't have the right communication. Yes, I know, Ferrari and radios, it's a sensitive subject at the moment, but considering that Ferrari has suddenly found themselves back in the hunt for P2 in the constructors, just 5 points behind Mercedes and 1 behind Red Bull, there is something to fight for, despite the SF25 taking a serious dive in performance compared to last year's car, with Charles Leclerc himself now insisting the team not give up on this year, since there might be something to it. Sure, the driver's title for both Ferrari drivers is not something they're really thinking about right now, since I think that's not going to happen, but the constructors, there's something to play for. So to stop things right now, even before the summer break, might be a detriment, and it might easily just condemn them to P4 because they wouldn't be in the running. Red Bull's going to keep going for the sake of Max. Mercedes, they got to get themselves out of a rut because clearly their update's not worked. In fact, I think it's made the car worse. And McLaren, well, they've got this all wrapped up so long as they don't get nobbled by the TD18 directive. Look, I don't believe we're going to be seeing a full-blown rift between Adami and Hamilton and it blowing up over the radio and then Adami suddenly being unceremoniously dumped. No. It's going to be one of those little things that will see more and more instances of awkward communications, things not working out ideally, and it's going to affect the reputation of Lewis at a moment where it's looking a little bit more shaky than it did back in January when Lewis Hamilton's move to Ferrari looked imperious. Because that grid drop moment could easily be the spanner drop moment, or the mic drop moment. I just don't have a microphone to hand. Hey, at least Ferrari are nailing it in the pit stops, though. No, that's not a joke, I'm serious, because if you look at the fastest pit stop table, they're absolutely nailing it. They got double the points as McLaren. They're really good in that department, at least. But okay, time to look at Spain. The last time will probably be around this track, and that's kind of sad. The only way we'll ever see it back, probably, is if the Madrid turns out to be a total disaster. I'll probably go to it, though. It's dead easy from Gatwick, since the track is kind of next to the airport, so why not? Forecasts show that temperatures may be around 30 degrees around the circuit, with virtually no chance of rain and only a little bit of a breeze to soothe the brows there. It just means the teams don't have to worry about weather springing any surprises for once for the first time in a few races, because even Monaco, there were talks about maybe a little bit of a light shower around Q2. That didn't happen. But Spain, nah, they're good. It's just going to be dry and sunny. And also, teams will have plenty of data around this place. This was the benchmark circuit before Bahrain took over that mantle. And thankfully, we won't have to worry about the C6 tyres until the next round in Canada, because we got the C1s, the C2s, the C3s, so we got the hardest ones there. You might get maybe 1 stops, we might see a cheeky 2, it really depends on what's been changed with the Pirelli compounds around the circuit, because tyre wear around here, it's pretty immense, hence why they've got the hardest compounds here. And also, let's not forget that technical directive will be a huge, major thing that many teams will be focusing on. Maybe there might be an opportunity there, we might see the status quo remain the same. It could easily be a damp squib, like we saw around Monaco with the 2-stop mandate. We all thought it was going to spice things up, that there would be chaos. Oliver Behrman almost gave us chaos, but then Haas weren't ready for him. Pierre Gasly could have stopped on the track forcing a safety car. That didn't happen, and he only just got a slap on the wrist for doing all that, which was incredibly dangerous, spewing debris everywhere. We didn't get a single safety car. This is going to be a track where many teams are going to be bringing big upgrades, including the likes of Ferrari, I imagine, and some other modifications as well from various other teams, because it is around the second act of the season, so perfectly understandable. But McLaren remain publicly unconcerned. They note that a similar clampdown on rear wings earlier in the year didn't affect them that much, and they expect to be not impacted negatively around with these new tests and regulations. They're claiming their current wing is even already in compliance. And that really wouldn't surprise me, because much like the Monaco gimmick, we could easily see all the hype being manifested here, that McLaren could be thrown off their perch, and either Red Bull come back into play, Ferrari come back into play, or somebody else, and then we just get them same old, where McLaren are pretty much competitive, only with maybe Red Bull being a little bit closer. And also, if I see another disappointment when it comes to my expectations and the actual result, I don't think it's going to do my ticker any good. But before we do the top 5, who else do I expect will be scoring some points here? And just shock horror, I will tell you right now, I don't expect the Mercedes to be in the top 5. I expect George Russell, at best, will be P6. And with Antonelli, he'll probably be lucky to score. But wait, where's all the hype that we saw from you early in the year regarding Mercedes being dark horses? I know, it's strange, but it seems that the update brought in for Imola has not done the W16 any favours. Not to mention the reliability issues, they've been a cause for concern, it proving to be the most temperamental of this car out of all the front-running teams. Because let's not forget Bahrain. Yes, George Russell still brought it home to get a P2, but it bugged out on him in every single way you could possibly imagine. This car is fragile. And now we've got the rear overheating thing coming back again from the 15, and you're looking at temperatures, it's going to be roasting here. Track temperatures could be over 50 degrees. And sure, the Mercedes is quite good on the C3 soft tyre, but it is the soft tyre, so you might not get much time on it unless they can get some solid qualifying positions, but then in the race, they may completely fall away. So I just thought I'd lay it out right there. I'm not expecting much from Mercedes. I'm thinking they've gone off the boil. And what's really interesting is that whilst McLaren have been just thumping their chests and going, we're not going to be affected by the directive whatsoever, which could easily maybe think that they're just doing distractions, Mercedes, I've really not heard that much at all in comparison. They've been relatively coy. Either they genuinely aren't going to be affected by this at all, in fact they may stand to gain from this, or they just don't want people to ask them. But Yuki remains a wild card in the upper points. After a tough Monaco, Spain may offer a shot at redemption, as long as he qualifies well, but I do think a P7 is doable for him. But having said that though, there'll be fewer excuses because Monaco being a place where you can't really overtake, so if you have a bad qualifying, there's not really much you can do unless there's a multi-car pile-up, like in F2. Then it's up to Yuki to make use of that clear air, make improvements with his qualifying, and get into Q3 to make sure they can capitalise on Mercedes' misfortune at the moment, and Ferrari picking themselves back up again, because this is when Yuki is needed by Red Bull more than ever. I do believe right now P2 is possible for Red Bull, but they need both drivers to be on it. And right now, Yuki, he may be getting up to speed, but that speed up in getting to needs to be speedier. Meanwhile, Williams continued to surprise many. I do reckon that both drivers will score again, and Sainz will be fired up to perform in front of his home crowd and to be the leading driver, after having once again in Monaco play the team game so Albon could lead them home. I also reckon he can score too. Alonso, I reckon that despite Aston Martin's woe last time out, will fight hard at home and seek to finally get a point to his name after losing 6 of them around Monaco. The car does have some potential. These upgrades do seem to be providing Aston Martin some sense of hope. At least they can challenge for points. Back in Miami, no, nothing doing. The rest of the pack, it's a little bit hard at the moment. Alpine, I don't know where they are right now. I forgot to mention, Colapinto managed to, I think, match Jack Doohan's best race result of P13 in a very anonymous race, but certainly a lot less bombastic than his teammates. And I looked at the replays, and Franco got almost taken out by Pierre. That's absolutely mental there. Haas, I don't really know. I mean, yeah, it was great they managed to get some points with Ocon. They made most of the fact that Lawson was being very much a barrier, a buffer to those behind him, which meant that Ocon could make the most of being behind Hadjar, clearer air almost. But right now, they need to focus on reliability improvements as well, and I'm just not really that confident of maybe anything more than 9th if they're lucky. But who knows, with this directive, we could see other twists and turns go up and down the order, not just at the front. But what you might want to know in terms of twists and turns are my top 5 predictions. And here they are. Now, even though the man is very keen to limit the discussion regarding going after his 5th world title, since it seems to be up and down very much like all of the memes are saying that, oh, Max gets a podium and the next race is not a podium and then a podium again and then so on, I am suspecting that around the Spanish Grand Prix, the place where Max Verstappen got his first win, he will get yet another win here. I think it will be his 66th, and let me try and explain why. Because around the higher speed layout of the Circuit de Catalunya, a place where Max, he knows it like the back of his hand like everyone else does, like in Japan, it might give him the edge to be able to qualify well, and the upgrades of recent note around Imola turning out to be quite clutch, even though Red Bull have admitted that there will be tracks they won't be strong at, kind of like Singapore with the RB19, but like in that year, it wasn't much of a priority. Tyre management seems to be really, really good, because look around Monaco, he made those tyres last so long. In fact, for a longest time, I thought they would have just taken the 30-second penalty, because they could just make those tyres last to the end. It was absolutely bonkers. So maybe this might reflect well with harder rubber, which means that Verstappen could easily try a cheeky one-stop, because again in Imola, he managed to make the one-stop work. He was dominant there without any quibbles or queries or concerns whatsoever. So I wouldn't be surprised if Red Bull try with Max a cheeky one-stop with mediums and then hards, etc., whereas other teams might have to do it too. And considering that Red Bull have been the squeakiest wheel that's finally gotten the grease regarding TD18, they could easily stand to benefit from all of this as well. Either that, or they just want to try and find some way of getting McLaren back close to them without them really having to pay or spend much more to do so themselves. It could be 50-50, but I am confident that throughout this triple header, one of the biggest beneficiaries of this will indeed be the Dutchman. because they called Monaco a damage limitation exercise, whereas now I think they're going to be going all out to make sure that Max is back in the competition hunt here. And I really don't suspect the McLarens at the moment, when they're trying to get their bearings as to where they are right now after this directive for the rest of the season, they'll be just counting what they've got and then just making good, and then them doing some damage limitation as well. Which is why I'm suspecting that Oscar Piastri will probably not be hounding the likes of Max Verstappen and wind up in second place, maybe about 5 to 10 seconds behind him. Just going for the fact that, hey, so long as he can finish ahead of Lando Norris, that's all that matters, because he does, Piastri, have 25 points over Verstappen. So you think that McLaren don't stand any chance of winning, Law? Well, I think they do, but it really depends on what the long-term goal of this championship hunt is for the likes of Piastri, and in regards to pushing too hard regarding the constructors, because sure, Red Bull will probably leapfrog Mercedes and get into P2 in the team standings, but they'll still be so far behind McLaren that it really won't be that much of an issue as of now. Just bring in the points and then ascertain where the team stands after this. But in the case of Piastri, I think this will be a case of just trying to end this triple header on a fairly solid note, because I am more than happy to admit that Imola, Monaco, they've not been great for Oscar. They've actually been kind of messy or overly cautious. He is more than happy to admit that there were moments in qualifying where he did drop the ball, which did cost him in the race, and then a suboptimal strategy in Imola that really compounded matters. It's all very little things, and it's all going up against one of the biggest generational talents that is going around at the moment. So it's not all a bad thing, it's just there's a little bit more left to be done. Because regardless, 4 wins, leading the championship at the moment, it just shows immense maturity. He's managed to garner so many more fans at the expense of Norris, who is now starting to clap back in his own right. And the key to McLaren's success at the moment has been traction, balance, and tyre management. So as long as the wings don't impact the tyre management thing here, it might mean that will give them some flexibility regarding strategy. It really depends on whether or not McLaren are true to their word, and they've already introduced a stiffer front wing to just get the head on everyone else and get some more data. But around Barcelona, the car should be fairly well suited. They have plenty of data around it, so I'm not expecting McLaren to completely fall off the order or just be mediocre enough to barely get in the top 5, but nor do I think they're going to be absolutely bulletproof or perfect or 30 seconds down the road. We're not going to be seeing those kind of wins anymore. And also, I just think it's going to be a conservative Grand Prix to find out where the lie of the land is for McLaren, and then go on from there as we then head into Canada, where we then could get a couple of weeks where everyone can go through all of the information they managed to accrue over the second triple header. But for Oscar, yeah, I think a P2 is perfectly reasonable, ahead of P3 Lando Norris. But that being said, whilst this triple header has not been that great for Oscar, for Lando, it's been the thing he's absolutely needed to stand any hope of coming back into this championship hunt in a compelling way and regaining some good standing with the fandom. With a P2 in Imola, a win, an historic win, one of his dreams being fulfilled, as he said, he's now starting to get the talk coming back to him, and he's walking the walk. It's all great stuff. I'll give him credit for that. Absolutely. And what's good for him is that the team is remaining neutral in their stance regarding priorities for either driver, and with what Norris is doing, he'll want to keep it that way. It all really comes down to qualifying. And qualifying at the moment, throughout the entire season even, has been determined by hundredths, thousands in some cases, so it could be very, very nip and tuck. And the only reason why I think that Lando will be down on Piastri is that on the moment, the qualifying competition, which Norris has historically been the king of, Oscar's got him good, at least at the moment. And then in terms of race results, he's got him good there as well. A win could be very, very plausible, but it really depends on whether he can get the edge on Verstappen and Piastri, because the way they are right now, Norris is going to have to fight hard. He's going to have to hustle that car. And that might be a detriment, because as we've seen, when he's been really hustling that car, a car which he hasn't 100% clicked, because even he's said that just because he's winning now, it doesn't necessarily mean everything's come back to him. So what he's got to do now is push that car really hard and still be on the front row. That's what he's got to do. And then I think we can get more of the naysayers starting to quieten down a little bit. He's doing good. He just needs to keep the momentum going. So I think another podium finish, not too bad. It's going to be great for us, but nerve-inducing for McLaren. I also think that the Ferraris could be in with a shout of a podium. They'll certainly be heading towards the top end of the point scorers, and if there is a little bit of argy-bargy up at the front or defensive tactics, they could easily be in touch for P3 at the very least, with Charles Leclerc leading them in. Out of the 2 Ferrari drivers, Leclerc looks like the stronger one. He's the one beating his chest and going, Ferrari, don't give up on this season, we might be onto something here. Because Ferrari, Leclerc, they were expecting nothing around here, but lo and behold, they got both cars in the top 5, quite handily so, and one of them almost got a win. That is a huge leap forward that they did not expect, and that is before their major upgrade. So who's to say whether or not they could easily be on the heels of McLaren fighting for that podium instead of them being a distant 4th and 5th place? Because if things keep going the way they are right now and everything's really all to play for, we could still see Leclerc bagging a couple of wins. The team is also quite confident that the front wing regulations could actually stand to benefit them, and I sort of believe them in a way, because they've been through the mills lately, and I think any opportunity they can, especially after their mid-season slump last year, I don't think they'll be making that same mistake again. They believe the SF25, they might have fixed the understeer that's been dogging them the entire campaign so far, that maybe they can actually turn, and around a medium high-speed track like Barcelona, that could be very important. And also, I think the tyre degradation of the Ferrari has actually been quite good this year, and their pit stops, everything's actually starting to look quite good for them, because again, if it turns out that it is going to be a 2-stop plan, then Ferrari's dominance in that department could easily see them get the edge over Mercedes and Red Bull to maybe be the second fastest car, or if not, the fastest car. It's so hard to predict at the moment, but I think a 4th place is just more than doable for the likes of Leclerc. And that therefore means I think Lewis will be rounding off the top 5 here, because he has been making steady progress. It's not been headline-inducing. There have been plenty of noise from his side of the camp that he's not been gelling well and that he's feeling that all is lost. And we've seen lots of negative comments from the likes of Hamilton. But then at the same time, more and more, we're seeing Ferrari drop the ball in moments where it really mattered because of that radio mix-up. There might be some changes that need to be done. A different race engineer to help really synchronize themselves with the likes of Lewis and therefore make sure that this progress speeds up a little. It's getting there because we're seeing more and more times where he can contest the top 5. And in a situation where the tyres might be really important here, if this car really works well with these upgrades, it can allow the end game might of Lewis, his tyre management toward the end of a race, to be titanic. Because throughout, even during the times when Mercedes were really bad, there were moments when Lewis could make up a couple of places toward the end of a race. And Ferrari, with their qualifying being a little bit so-so, that could be crucial. And maybe that might bring Lewis back into play to bring some solid points, and therefore make the most, like Red Bull, of Mercedes' struggles at the moment, to at least be in contention for the top 3, but still, they're only 5 points behind Toto's team, and that's just wild. But hopefully Lewis can regain some traction that's been lost since he arrived at Maranello. But I had no such concerns when I arrived through the doors of Silverstone, me getting to sample the track showcase of F1's 75th birthday. To take a leisurely tour of the exhibition with me, watch this video next, straight after this one.